The sun had barely climbed above the tiled roofs of Rome when the first chains began rattling through the Forum Boarium. Morning light spilled across the marketplace in thin, golden blades, illuminating rows of wooden platforms and the crude iron rings hammered into them. A city of stone and marble awakened each day with pride in its empire, but this district stirred with something darker, something Rome preferred to keep unspoken. Here, behind the Senate stalls and triumphant arches, the empire's hunger exposed its teeth. Ilia felt the cold bite of iron before she even opened her eyes. The cuff around her ankle had rubbed her skin raw during the march from Campania, and when she shifted, a flare of pain shot up her leg. She tried to sit upright, but coarse hands shoved her forward, forcing her into line with the others, women, mostly. Some were young wives taken during raids. Some were debtors sold by desperate families. Others were simply unlucky enough to be born on the losing side of Rome's ambition. Ilia had once been the daughter of a modest vintner, a quiet life, a safe one, until her village became collateral in a land dispute between two Roman landowners. Rome's laws had words for everything: territorium, pecunia, proprietas. None of them had words for mercy. She steadied her breath as the slaver's overseer, a balding man with a whip coiled around his belt like a pet serpent, surveyed the chained women. He stopped in front of Ilia. His eyes were small, calculating. She hated that she felt a tremor inside her chest when he tilted her chin upward with the tip of a wooden rod. "Stand straight," he ordered. "Buyers pay more for confidence." Her jaw clenched. She obeyed. From the edges of the marketplace, wealthy patrons began drifting inward. Some wore togas pinned with gold brooches. Others, soldiers on leave, carried themselves with a swagger sharpened by victory. They came early to inspect the new arrivals, looking for skill, beauty, obedience, whatever suited their private needs. A hush spread to the group of chained women as two Roman matrons passed by, escorted by a servant holding a wax tablet. They examined the captives like one might inspect cuts of cloth or pottery. When their gaze reached Ilia, she held their eyes, refusing to drop hers. One of the matrons raised a brow, intrigued, but continued walking. "You'll fetch a good price if you don't ruin your face with fear," whispered the woman chained beside her. The speaker was older, perhaps in her late 30s, with streaks of silver at her temples and a bearing far too dignified for such a place. Her name, Ilia had learned during the march, was Livia, once a Greek tutor in a patrician household. Ilia didn't know whether the woman meant it as comfort or curse. A trumpet sounded from the auction block, slicing through the murmur of the crowd. Ilia's breath caught. First light meant the selling would begin soon. The marketplace workers hurried into formation, unfurling canopies to provide shade, raising platforms, and securing signs indicating each slave's origin, age, and supposed qualities. For the women, this usually meant a single word etched into a wooden placard: domestica, lectrix, pulchra. The last one made Ilia's stomach knot. She could feel Rome measuring her already. A pair of soldiers dragged a younger girl, barely 16, onto the nearest platform. Her wrists were bound, her eyes swollen from crying, her hair tangled from the long journey. The auctioneer's voice rose loudly above the noise. A healthy Samnite girl, no injuries, strong build, suitable for domestic work or household service. 24 years of life unwed. The girl shook visibly. Ilia, even in terror, felt something harden in her chest. When the bidding began, she forced herself to turn away. She didn't want to see who would claim the girl. She didn't want to witness the moment when a person became property under the approving gaze of Roman law. Livia leaned closer. "Do not break," she murmured. "They prize broken things less, but the world punishes them more." Ilia swallowed. "How do you know?" "Because Rome bought me once already." A shout cut off the conversation. "You too." The overseer pointed his rod at Elia and Livia. "Prepare them for the next block." The chains rattled violently as the women were separated from the line and led toward a raised platform at the center of the square. Elia's pulse quickened. Up close, she could see deep scratches on the wooden boards, left by those who'd stood where she was about to. Marks of struggle, marks of history Rome pretended not to write. As they reached the steps, a rumble rippled through the crowd. A high-ranking Roman official, escorted by 2 lictors, approached the auction. His crimson-striped toga confirmed his status. The crowd parted around him like water. Livia exhaled sharply. A senator. Elia didn't understand why her voice carried a note of dread until she saw the way the slavers straightened, the way the buyers whispered, the sudden fevered interest sweeping the market. Senators rarely attended slave auctions themselves. When they did, it meant one thing. They planned to purchase something, or someone very specific. The senators' eyes scanned the platforms. Then they paused. On her, Elia felt the world tighten around her like a fist of iron, and the chains on her wrists suddenly felt far too light to hold back the future rushing toward her. The senator's gaze held Elia with an unsettling calm, as though he were not choosing a human life, but assessing a piece of architecture, calculating angles, structure, value, purpose. His face was lean, almost hawk-like, the lines around his mouth carved not by laughter, but by judgment. His lictors stood rigidly behind him, their bundled rods reflecting the morning sun in thin, threatening glints. Elia tried to read his expression, but it remained impenetrable. A Roman mask, emotionless, efficient. The auctioneer, noticing the senator's interest, puffed his chest and rubbed his hands together with theatrical energy. Honored Senator Cassius Varro joins us today. May Fortuna guide his choices. He gestured broadly for the crowd to quiet. We have 2 fine captives, healthy, skilled, and capable of immediate service. Livia's hand brushed Elia's, a faint, grounding touch before the 2 were separated and positioned on opposite sides of the platform. Elia's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing louder than the clamor below. Senator Cassius stepped closer. Elia forced herself not to flinch. Behind him, murmurs rippled through the watchers. Wealthy Romans, curious onlookers, soldiers seeking entertainment. A slave auction was common spectacle, but a senator's presence elevated it to theater. People pushed forward, eager to see what kind of woman a man of such influence would purchase, and for what purpose. State their origins, Cassius said, his tone clipped, his attention fixed solely on Elia. The auctioneer launched into a polished recitation. The younger one, Elia, is from Campania, a vintner's daughter. Strong, unscarred, educated enough to perform simple household duties. No children, no husband. Elia stiffened. The cataloging of her life, stripped of context, boiled down criteria, felt worse than the chains. And the other? Cassius asked, glancing briefly at Livia. A Greek tutor, sir, cultured, well-spoken, capable of reading and writing in 2 languages. Livia lowered her gaze modestly, but Elia could sense the tension radiating from her like heat from stone. Cassius considered them both for a long moment. Then he lifted a hand and pointed, deliberately, unmistakably, at Elia. I will take her. The words hit Elia like a physical blow. The auctioneer beamed. As you wish, Senator. Shall we begin the bidding at? There will be no bidding, Cassius interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of authority. The girl is confiscated by order of the Senate, under the right of appropriation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the slavers exchanged startled looks. The right of appropriation was rarely invoked. It granted high-ranking officials the power to seize certain captives under the claim of state necessity, though everyone knew it was often abused for personal desires cloaked in legal haze. The overseer stepped forward hesitantly, Senator, with respect, she was lawfully obtained by... Cassius raised a single eyebrow. The man instantly fell silent and bowed his head. Ilya didn't understand all the laws, but she understood enough. She wouldn't even be sold. She would be claimed, taken. Livia's voice carried softly, urgently, across the platform. Do not resist, Ilya. Resistance is used as justification for worse fates. But Ilya's pulse hammered in her ears. Her eyes darted between the lictors, the overseer, the senator, the hundreds of strangers witnessing her unmaking. She felt exposed, more than exposed, undone. The overseer's hand clamped over her arm and began dragging her toward the steps. She stumbled, nearly falling, chains biting into her ankles. The platform boards blurred under her feet. Stop, Cassius commanded. Everyone froze. He approached Ilya directly, the crowd falling silent as if the air itself held its breath. Cassius was tall, his shadow stretching across the wooden planks like a dark omen. You will walk, he said to her quietly but firmly, not be dragged. I do not collect broken merchandise. Ilya's cheeks burned with humiliation, fury, and fear all at once. But the alternative, being beaten into obedience, hovered too close. She straightened. The overseer stepped back. Chains rattling, Ilya slowly descended the steps under her own power. The lictors closed around her, forming a cordon that cut her off from the slavers, the crowd, even Livia's worried gaze. As they led her out of the Forum, she cast one last look at the Greek woman. Livia stood tall on the platform, eyes fixed on Ilya with an expression that was neither pity nor resignation, but warning. Ilya swallowed hard and turned away as the marketplace doors closed behind her, muffling the shouts and bidding and laughter from within. The world outside seemed too bright, too sharp. Every scent, roasting chestnut, smoke, perfume, was overwhelming. People glanced at her chains, then at the senator escorting her, and looked away quickly. For all Rome's pride, no one wanted to linger on the sight of a newly claimed slave. As they moved through the winding streets toward the Palatine Hill, a cold truth settled deep in Ilya's bones. Whatever awaited her in the senator's household would not be freedom, but it might reveal something far more dangerous. The reason he had chosen her, and why he had invoked a lower reserve for secrets Rome didn't want spoken aloud. Ilya expected the senator's home to loom like a fortress, all marble severity and patrician pride. But as she was led to the gates of Cassius Vero's villa, she found herself somewhere far quieter and far more unsettling. The walls were high enough to keep out the noise of Rome, but inside, the villa seemed built to swallow sound entirely. Cypress trees lined the courtyard, their tall, dark columns casting thin, cage-like shadows across the gravel paths. The air hung heavy with the scent of resin and oil lamps. Even the fountains murmured softly, as though afraid to disturb whatever secrets lived within the walls. The lictors guided Ilya across a mosaic floor, depicting Neptune taming wild horses. She noticed a tesserae, tiny squares of marble, arranged so the sea god's eyes gleamed unerringly when the light struck them. Ilya wondered if all patricians decorated their homes with scenes of domination, or if this was a particular choice of Cassius Vero. The senator walked ahead, hands clasped behind his back, his stride controlled and silent. Not once did he look behind to see if Ilya followed. Inside the atrium, servants gathered quickly in neat lines, bowing their heads. None of them lifted their eyes long enough to meet hers. It was as though the presence of a new slave claimed under the right of appropriation was not merely unusual, but dangerous to acknowledge. One older servant, a woman with a tightly braided knot of gray hair, stepped forward. "She will be housed in the western quarter, Senator?" she asked. Cassius paused. "Temporarily. Her duties will be decided later." The woman bowed and gestured for Ilya to follow. But before Ilya took a single step, Cassius's voice halted her. Not that way. Bring her to the tablinum first. The servant stiffened. Even the air felt startled. The tablinum, the private study, the heart of a Roman household's power. The gray-haired servant nodded once, hesitation flickering briefly in her eyes. Ilya's pulse quickened. She was being taken somewhere she clearly did not belong, somewhere new slaves were never meant to see. The tablinum was dim, lit by a pair of bronze lamps that hissed faintly with hot oil. Scrolls lay in organized stacks across a long wooden table. Maps adorned the walls. Territorial lines, military routes, grain transport paths, and something Ilya recognized from her village's ruin, land survey grids. Cassius stood with his back to her, studying a parchment unfurled before him. The servant bowed and withdrew, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. For a long moment, nothing moved. Ilya stood rigidly, the iron around her wrists biting deeper as her arms trembled. Finally, Cassius spoke. You lied during the march. Ilya blinked. I didn't speak at all. Precisely. He turned, the lamplight sharpening the angles of his face. A woman who says nothing often has far more to hide than those who speak too much. She didn't know whether he expected a reply, so she gave none. Cassius stepped closer, studying her with the same cold scrutiny he had shown at the auction. Your village was burned after a dispute between landowners Titus Marcellus and Publius Severus. You know this. Ilya swallowed tightly. Yes. What you do not know, he continued, is that both men have accused each other of sabotaging the grain yields from their adjoining properties. That sabotage, he tapped the map behind him, threatens the supply lines feeding a legion in the east. Ilya stared at him, uncomprehending. What does that have to do with me? You were found on Marcellus's land, Cassius said, but your family's vineyard bordered both estates. You might have seen something. A boundary marker moved. A trench dug overnight. A paid arsonist lingering in the hills. Anything. Ilya felt the memory of fire flare behind her eyes, the smoke choking the sky, the shouts, the heat clawing at her skin. She remembered running through the vines, seeing embers devour them like hungry mouths. But she had seen no trench, no hidden saboteur, only chaos. I saw nothing, she said quietly. Cassius studied her face for cracks in the truth. When he found none, his expression didn't soften, only shifted like a door closing. That is unfortunate, he said. For you. Ilya's breath hitched. Why did you take me if I'm of no use? Because, Cassius replied, turning away, a living witness is more valuable than a dead one, until proven otherwise. The implication struck her like a blow. Before she could speak, a knock sounded at the door. The gray-haired servant entered, bowing deeply. Senator, your presence is required in the hall. The envoy from Praetorian Prefect has arrived. Cassius nodded. See that the girl is not left unattended. He strode out, his lictors falling behind him. The servant approached Ilya slowly, her gaze assessing not cruel but cautious, as if measuring the shape of danger around the girl. You must come, she said softly. The senator does not leave things unfinished. If he brought you here, it is for a reason you may not understand yet. Ilya followed her out of the tablinum, her mind spiraling. She had expected enslavement, cruelty, labor. Not this, not political intrigue, not surveillance, not being pulled into the gravity of Rome's hidden machinery. As she stepped into the dim corridor, the servant's words lingered like a chill crawling over her skin. For a reason you may not understand yet. Ilya felt in her bones the terror that she had stumbled into a world where women were used not merely as property, but as pawns. And pawns, she knew, were always the first to be sacrificed. Night draped itself over the villa like a velvet shroud, deepening every shadow until the corridors seemed to breathe. Elia lay awake on a thin mattress in the western quarters, listening to distant footsteps, muffled conversation, and the low groan of wooden beams settling. Sleep drifted near but refused to come, chased away by the suffocating thought that every sound might bring new orders, new interrogations, or worse. Her mind churned with Cassius's words. A living witness is more valuable than a dead one, until proven otherwise. But a witness to what? The fire? The sabotage? The politics rotting beneath Rome's marble mask? Before dawn's first silver edge touched the courtyard, the gray-haired servant, whose name Elia had learned was Marcia, arrived at her door. "Up," Marcia whispered. Quickly. Elia jolted upright. "Why? What's happening?" "The Praetorian envoy returns at sunrise. They want your fate decided before then." Cold dread soaked into her limbs, but she obeyed, throwing on the simple tunic she'd been given. Marcia guided her through a narrow passageway, rarely used by servants. Oil lamps flickered in the alcoves, their flames casting wavering halos across the stone walls. "Where are we going?" Elia asked. Marcia paused, listening for footsteps. "To the truth," she murmured, "or what pieces of it remain." They pushed through a small door that opened into a secluded courtyard behind the villa. The scent of cypress clung heavily to the air, but beneath it lingered something darker, char, faint and old but unmistakable. Elia froze. "Why does it smell like—" Marcia's expression tightened. "Because this place has burned before." She led Elia toward a low structure at the edge of the courtyard, a shed unremarkable in shape, its wooden beams recently replaced. As Marcia pushed the door open, a chill swept over Elia. Inside lay rows of storage jars, some cracked, some soot-stained. A charred beam rested in the corner, like a blackened bone. Memories surged. Smoke. Flames. The vines curling in on themselves. Elia pressed a hand to her mouth. "This looks like my father's vineyard," she whispered. "It used to be," Marcia said quietly. "These are from your land." Elia's knees nearly buckled. "Why? Why would the senator bring these here?" Marcia stepped closer, voice low. "Because he knows the truth of the fire. He needed someone who could recognize what was done." Elia turned slowly. "You know something." "Enough," Marcia murmured. "Years ago, your village wasn't the only one burned. Cassius's own brother died in a similar sabotage along the grain routes. He's been hunting the culprit ever since. The two landowners, Marcellus and Severus, are mere puppets in a larger struggle. And your vineyard," she knelt beside a broken jar, running her fingers over the soot. "Your vineyard sits on the boundary with a hidden aqueduct line." Elia blinked. "An aqueduct? But why would someone—" "To control water," Marcia said. "And with it, grain. And with grain, legions." Elia's breath caught. This was bigger than a petty feud. It was Rome's lifeblood. Marcia's voice softened. "Someone burned your home to erase evidence of tampering with the aqueduct. Elia, the senator brought you here because he believes you might recall something the saboteurs overlooked." Elia staggered back, memories flickering like embers, running, screaming. But then, a shadow moving near the vineyard boundary. Not during the fire, but weeks before. A man with a limp, carrying tools wrapped in cloth. Her breath hitched. I saw someone." Marcia's eyes sharpened. "Describe him." "He walked oddly," Elia whispered. "Left leg stiff, and he wore a scarlet scarf. I saw him twice near the boundary posts. My father said he was a traveling surveyor, but—" Marcia's face drained of color. "What?" Elia demanded. "A scarlet scarf. That is the mark of the prefect's private contractors." She swallowed. "Elia, your village wasn't destroyed by rival landowners. The prefect's men did it. to cover the diversion of water. And now his envoy has come for you. Ilya felt her world tilt. Because I could reveal the truth. Marcia gripped her shoulders. Cassius suspected it, but he needed confirmation before the prefect silenced you. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the courtyard. Heavy, urgent. Marcia's eyes widened. They're here. Ilya, run. What about you? I am already chained to this house, Marcia said, a bitter smile flickering. You still have a chance. She pushed Ilya toward a narrow exit at the back of the shed. Ilya stumbled into the dawn air, heart pounding, feet tearing across gravel. Shadows streaked between the cypress trees. Lictors? Or something worse? A voice shouted. Another answered. Ilya didn't look back. She reached the back wall of the villa and climbed, scraping her palms raw. As she swung her leg over the top, a pair of horns sounded from the front gate. The Praetorian envoy. If they searched the villa, they would find the shed. They would know someone talked. Ilya dropped to the other side, landing hard but steady. She slipped into the labyrinth of Rome's early morning streets, where vendors were setting up stalls and citizens bustled unaware of the corruption threaded beneath their feet. She turned once, just once. The senator stood at the villa gate, watching Praetorian guards march in. His eyes rose to meet Ilya's distant silhouette. He did not call out. He only nodded once, sharply. The silent acknowledgement of a man who had gambled everything on a truth only she could carry. Ilya breathed in, the chill of dawn filling her lungs. She ran, not as a slave fleeing a master, but as a witness fleeing an empire's lie. A lie built on the backs of countless women bought, silenced, or sacrificed. And she understood, with fierce clarity, the moral history had carved in blood and ash. Empires do not fear enemies. They fear the voices of the powerless. When those voices finally speak,